I recently watched a video by Nick Carver on whether it was okay to manipulate an image, and I wanted to respond to it mainly because I'm bored, and secondly because I feel I can add something. Like many people who would have watched his video, I'm coming from the other end of the spectrum. I'm very quick to rely on post. I'm very quick to remove distractions in post, or I will orchestrate a scene to deliver what I see is going to be a better result. My images are quite heavily worked over, they're manipulated a lot in post, and Nick mentions the work of like Peter Lick, for instance, and I like to think that my work isn't quite as, well, is nowhere near as garish and kind of rank as his is. That's kind of how I see his work, but you can decide for yourselves. The inevitable work of mediation or construction is involved in all photography, as decisions about the position of the camera, the spatial relations, the lens used, distance, focus are what organise the staging of a scene. So what Bates means by this is that in order to manipulate the way that the viewer reads an image, it doesn't have to be done in post. You don't have to be manipulating images in Photoshop, removing distractions and things like that in order to make the viewer read the image more along your narrative. And you can do this, every photographer knows this, if you come across a beautiful scene, you can pose it to maybe crop out that bin that might have been in the corner. You might decide to shoot at f1.8 or 1.4 in order to blur a background of a portrait so that a busy high street isn't seen in the background or something like that. And the reason that that is relevant to what I want to talk about is that the first image has been manipulated, and over the years it's been quite controversial as an image, but not for the post-production work that was done on it. I'll start by saying that there was some distraction removal. There was a thumb present in the image, which I'll show you in a second, but that wasn't what the image was known for in terms of controversy. So Migrant Mother was taken in 1936 by Dorothea Lange, and it's an image that most people know, most photographers would know. It's a really powerful image, it's a beautiful image, but it's an image that concerns itself with misrepresentation. So we'll start with how Lange recalls the situation, and this can be found in various interviews and articles on the net. She stated that she approached Thompson, the woman in the photo, and her family, said very little to her. There was very little communication. She initially stated that she shot 5 frames. It turns out that it was 6 frames. I'm not sure why she said 5 frames. Could well have just been an oversight. And she said that, very little was said. She edged closer and closer, and with each time that she closed the gap, the photo became more intimate. Now, most people would argue that probably wasn't the case. You look at the contact sheet, and it was very obviously a staged image. One article points out that the chair or the chairs that were initially outside, that you can see in the wide shot, were pushed further back into the canopy. In addition, Lange decided to not include within her composition the older children. So what we're left with is a really powerful image, but it's not a complete image of how Thompson lived. Photographically, the image is really strong. There are a number of reasons why it's an incredible image. The framing of it, and just that this moment in time is really powerful. But nonetheless, it wasn't a true image in the sense that it wasn't a documentary image, not like you and I would maybe consider a documentary image, in that it was staged. One line in particular stood out to me that I found quite amusing, and it was, there she sat in the lean-to tent with her children huddled around her, and seemed to know that my pictures might help her, and so she helped me. There was a sort of equality about it. I think most people would argue that this relationship that they had, this was not equal. This was very much a photographer who had a job to do, taking advantage of a scene that she stumbled across. So Lange was a social photographer, documentary photographer, but she didn't claim, I don't think anyone else ever claimed, that her work was art. It was never like an artistic representation. It was always trying to be truthful. Trying and failing, some would argue, but trying to be truthful. So the second image that I want to look at is the mugshot of O.J. Simpson that was on the cover of Newsweek and the cover of Time in '94 when he was on trial for murder. Now, Newsweek ran an unedited police snapshot of him on their cover, whereas Time had the image quite dramatically edited. James R. Gaines commissioned the edit on the image for Time, and he commented on the edited image after the controversy kicked off. He said the harshness of the mugshot, the merciless bright light, the stubble on Simpson's face, the cold specificity of the picture had been subtly smoothed and shaped into an icon of tragedy. The expression on his face was not merely blank now, it was bottomless. The public fought back against Gaines's choice in running with the manipulated image and claimed that it played on racial stereotypes, one critic saying that it sent him back to the ghetto. Gaines stuck with his argument throughout, which was that the image had been elevated into an art piece effectively, and therefore it didn't have to follow the same rules as a journalistic image. Most people would disagree with that. You know, in editing the image in the way that they did, they effectively biased their viewers. So that's really all I wanted to say about this image. The point of, if a work is artistic, it's a representation of someone, of a scene, does that then mean that it doesn't have to follow the same ethical boundaries, ethical guidelines as other works, such as journalistic works? I think most people would argue that, you know, this is on the front of a news weekly, therefore shouldn't it try and remain objective? And in editing the image in the way that they did, they have effectively added subjectivity to that. They're trying to mould the viewer to see Simpson, to see this image as they want him viewed. The last of the documentary or the news images that I wanted to look at before moving on to something a bit lighter is an image by Paul Hansen. The image is undoubtedly very powerful. It's of two small children who have been killed, being carried through the streets. Now, the image was controversial because once it had been submitted, the image you're looking at now was a submitted image to, I believe, the World Press Association Photographer of the Year. I'm sorry, don't quote me on that. It's probably not that, but something like that. I'll link in the description where you can view the image. After it was submitted, it was tested, I believe, with effectively AI-based software that looked into the metadata to try and get a broader picture of whether any manipulation had been done. It came back that it had been manipulated. Therefore, Hansen had to basically jump through hoops to try and prove that his image was not heavily manipulated. The long and short of it is that he was found to be innocent if you like, of heavily editing this news image. So the image now is the actual image that won. So the first image, again, is what he originally submitted. It then got tested, he had to justify himself, and this image is the one that ended up winning the competition, effectively once the editing had been removed, or probably not removed, but toned down. I would say it's still edited, it's still being dodged and burnt. So this image caused quite a lot of controversy. To me, this isn't a controversial image at all, in the sense of what the photographer has done in post-production. You know, he's adjusted contrast, exposure, some light dodging and burning. But has it edited? Has it altered the emotional impact, the story, the scene in any way? To me, no. There's always going to be people that disagree with that. But I see the second image that ended up winning the World Press Photo Award is no less powerful than the image that Hansen submitted with the harsher edit on it. So, moving away from journalistic or documentary or social commentary works, we'll do something a little bit lighter. So the image here is from Chris Dawley Brown, and it's from his book, which I believe is called The Corners, or it may just be Corners. It was in 2018. I have it on the shelf. I'm too lazy to go and get it. It's a really good book. Now, you look at this image, and of course it's been edited. You can see that it's been edited. It's too perfect to be anything else. So if we compare this image to Nick's guidelines that he has for his own work, this would be an unacceptable image, as would the whole book. The whole book is, so I'll tell you what it is. It's basically composites. So it's, I think, 18 to 20, something like that, images shot over the space of around an hour. So this scene did exist. The people in the scene weren't placed there. They weren't asked to stand in any particular way. There was no interaction with the people. It's just that these people weren't all in this scene at the same time. Like I say, it's spread around an hour or so, I believe, in most of the images. But I think you'd agree that the image from a photographic or from an artistic perspective is probably stronger for it. So you look at the guy standing just on the corner there, looking up towards the blue sign. And then you go to the guy in the pink shirt. They perfectly frame the woman that's in the background, and the other person that's in the bottom left corner, bending down, helps guide your eye along that diagonal back up towards the Rio sign. Moving on to the second image of his that I want to talk about, Tower Court and Demolition, 2014. It's the same story. Obviously, again, taking place over around an hour. It's a composite of lots of different frames. So he has picked his favourite frames, or at least sequenced these frames that work together and put them into one single image. And again, the image, I think, artistically is a more powerful image than having just one of these people within the scenes. And for both of these images, you could argue both for it being a documentary image and against it being a documentary image. The fact of the matter stands that there was no interaction with anyone in the scenes. It was just a guy, Chris Dorley Brown, stood on a corner watching people walk past and taking photos of them. That is a documentary image. At least that's how I see a documentary image as being. But a purist, not necessarily even a purist, I'll use Nick as an example again. I feel that he would think that this wasn't a documentary image. Would he see this as being acceptable? Perhaps. Then I feel he probably wouldn't see this as a documentary image. He would maybe see this more as a fine art piece. And I probably agree with that. But the reason I find these images and his book, his work in particular, interesting, I don't necessarily wholeheartedly believe this, but one point I argued is that these images may be a better documentary, a better single image than any other documentary image in the true sense of a documentary image, one frame, unedited, could be. In that what he's done is almost more like videos, more like moving image. He's managed to capture a scene over a broader period of time. I mean, yes, none of these people, or some of the people were, I've spoke to Chris over email for my dissertation. Some of the people within a frame were in the frame together. I'll show you one more image just so you can see what I mean. But so if you say that just the people that are in the images weren't all in the images together, we'll go from there. And that is true. They weren't all in the image together, but they were all in that area, and they were all in that area across that period of, say, an hour. As a social documentary photo, it probably builds a broader picture of that area. It gives you a larger slice of the demographic. It shows you the type of person that may reside in that area. Therefore, you know, like a social scientist may be able to build a broader picture. You know, nothing's false about this image. The people that are in the image were there. You know, it will give you an idea of the type of person that maybe resides in the area. It will give you an idea about the overall income levels perhaps in the area, and so on. The third image I'll show you then is of Graham Road, and this is one of the images that I spoke to Chris about. So my question to him was the guy, so the third, bottom left corner, third guy in, the guy that's looking at the woman crossing the street, my question was, were they in this scene together? And the reason I asked that question is because if they weren't in the scene together, then in composing it like this and effectively making the guy look at the girl in post, even though that never happened, that could potentially bring up some ethical concerns, in that he's painting this guy to effectively be a predator, to have predatory behaviour towards a woman, which if it never happened, that could be quite irresponsible. Of course, I'm not saying that guys aren't predators. I think on the whole we're probably arseholes. But that was my point. As it turns out, they were in the scene together anyway. So, but I think you know what I was getting at. So we'll finish it off by looking at two of my images, and I'll show you the before and after of each. So the image here, I like the image. I think it's a good image. I like the composition, and I could have left this the way it was, obviously removing the light and removing my two dudes that are down there that were helping me. And I think it would be a strong image. Maybe taking a couple of distractions out, like just down the dirt track to the right side of the dirt track, just past the tree line, I think it's a manhole cover or something. I could have took that out, maybe given it a very slight colour grade, and it would have been fine. But I didn't do that, I did this. And this wasn't the final image, I actually reworked it before submitting to competitions, but this is close to how the final image was. I toned it back a bit, and I took some yellow out of it. And I think as a result of the edit, I think it's a more powerful image. I brought the sky down, or cropped in a little tighter, as well as dragging out the edges to make it wider, to feel more like perhaps a grab from like a cine still grab or something like that. Obviously I darkened it, played with contrast, I added haze in the atmosphere to give it the feel that maybe it was foggy, it was really cold. And I think overall it makes for a stronger, more pleasing image. And the second of my images, you'll see that the before versus the after has more of a drastic difference than the image we just looked at. So this is before. It's a cool image. It was shot at the Barbican in London. It was a really nice bright day. Actually, it was a really stormy day, but then, you know, shards of sun would just cut through, and it was really cool. So the girl on the stairs was a model that me and my friend were shooting, and as she was walking up the stairs, I just saw the composition, thought it was cool, so you know, posed her and took a few frames. Obviously, it's quite a messy scene in that, you know, in the foreground you've got these chairs, you've got the City of London sign, street signs, the lamps, which actually, now looking at the raw, the lamp that's directly above her on the wall, I don't actually mind, but you'll see that I removed that. But it's a cool image, but it's, you know, it's a cool snapshot at this stage. All of the distractions have been removed so that it's quite a clean, clinical image. Some directional light has been put in, some shadows. Obviously the plane in the background, the plane's there just because I thought she looked kind of like an air hostess, so I thought, why not, we'll add a plane. And overall it has a really kind of dystopian feel to it, at least for me it has a really dystopian feel to it. And this image has had some success in competitions, so I submitted to the AOP Awards and was a finalist, and as a result have been published. It's a tiny thumbnail photo in effectively the back of a book for the AOP book, for the AOP Awards. And in January or February, I think we're going to be exhibited in Canary Wharf in London, assuming it still goes ahead. But so this image did fairly well. It was fairly well received, whereas the raw image would never have been. But then this image and the one before it of mine, you look at them as a viewer, and you would probably assume, if you really thought about it, you'd assume that they were heavily edited. You know, I don't claim to be a documentary photographer. I've never done any documentary work, and therefore, ethically, I feel that I haven't crossed over any kind of line. I feel like I've not come close to any line. You know, Nick referenced Gregory Crewdson, who, you know, I love his work. I think a lot of photographers, will reference Crewdson's work because it's just phenomenal. It's very cinematic, very emotive. I view my work, although at the moment certainly not in quality, I view my work to be in the same kind of realm as artistic photography, and therefore I think anything goes really. Perhaps other than, say, body modification. So that's it really. That's just my thought on Nick's video and whether I feel it's right to edit an image. I've just realised that I haven't actually given an answer at all. I'm none the wiser and you're probably none the wiser. So I suppose, what are my overall thoughts? I think it massively depends on what the image is intended for, firstly. So a documentary image on the whole should be truthful, it should represent fact and be objective, whereas an artistic image I don't think has to follow those same rules. There are other concerns such as representation. An image such as an image that I might make or Crewdson might make has to follow certain rules, I think, and has to consider certain ethical points. I'm a male photographer, so I have to think about the way I'm representing women. But in terms of image manipulation, I don't think the act of manipulating an image in itself constitutes an ethical concern, at least not for me. And so, really, I think I completely agree with Nick in that there isn't really a right or wrong answer. It's knowing what you're comfortable with. I think you have to consider what your image is in your own mind. It's, if you're shooting reportage, then of course you're going to influence what the viewer sees. You're going to choose your lenses and you're going to choose your composition, your focal length, etc., etc. So you're going to influence how the viewer sees the image. You're going to guide their eye to what you want them to look at. But I think as long as you're conscious of what you're doing, and as long as you're conscious perhaps of any bias that you put into an image, and as long as you're comfortable with what you're doing, it's all good. That's it. One more thing I just wanted to say, or two, maybe three more things. Firstly, I've only just noticed the light that was on that wall over there died some time ago, so sorry about that when you see the colour shift. And secondly, sorry if the edits are a bit jaggedy. I can see I keep doing that and messing up. Nick, if you ever watch this, did you talk for that long? Was that one take? I don't know how you did it. That's ridiculous. Bye.